hitting the go live button now, and we are live, supposedly. It's always a toss up until I see that there's like somebody watching, but but we'll just assume that everything is going according to plan and we're live. Oh, we have 4 people watching already. How exciting. And I'll go ahead and just welcome everybody who's joining us today. This is Boobies and Newbies July Tit Talk panel. We are here to discuss the elusive baby-free HEA in romance novels, because it is something that I feel like is widely discussed amongst romance readers. And I think this was a topic that had been planned pre-overturning of Roe v. Wade. However, I think that happening has definitely added to the conversation, or at least brought it more into the forefront of some people's minds. So something that I'm looking forward to chatting about with each of you, because I know this is a topic that all of us are very passionate about having a discussion about. So before we get into that, I'd love it if each of my panelists could just go ahead and introduce themselves, and I'll throw it over to Jenny.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny. I write contemporary romance my tagline is with the funnies and the feels. So I write light angst, funny romance that is in a bunch of different settings. My current series is a small town romance series that takes place in a fictional Northern California town. And I think it's relevant for this discussion that I am child-free by choice. My husband and I decided not to have children, and we have taken measures to make sure that doesn't happen accidentally. So
interesting.
Anybody feel free to jump in. Lila, I'll just point to you because I'm looking at you.
Thank you. So hi everybody, I'm Lila, and I also am a contemporary romance author. I released my first book last year, and I'm just about to announce when my third is going to drop, but it's also small town romance, fictional town, which is set in the South in the States. I've kind of said like around Tennessee, but just imagine down south. And although I don't have a partner, so I'm technically child-free not by choice, I am also child-free by choice, and I will stay that way. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this discussion.
Awesome. And Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. I also go by Musings of a Fox on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all that good stuff. I am a fat activist and a plus size creator. I make plus size fashion content, but with a fat liberation eye. It's not about just looking good in clothes. It's about changing the world and changing laws and getting protections for fat bodies and challenging fat phobia. And yeah, I am married to my husband of 5 years, but we've been together 14. We're currently child-free. I don't know if or when that will change. I'm kind of waiting for the idea of a child to be around me to sound like a good idea before I have any kids. So far, I have not had a moment where I'm like, wow, I really would like a child in this situation. I'm just not feeling it, and that's fine. I'm not anti-baby, but yeah, just it's not my current bag. And I am like a long-time romance reader. I've been reading them since I was really young. I think my first romance novel involved a girl who was in love with a ghost that haunted her bedroom.
I love it.
I kind of miss that book. I want to like find it and reread it. Yeah, so I'm like a long time reader, second time Boobies and Newbies talker. So I'm really excited to get the author's perspective on this subject today.
Yeah, no, and it was really important to me when putting together Tit Talk that we had a variety of perspectives coming from authors, bloggers, bookstagrammers, booktubers, and even readers of the genre, because I think depending on what your perspective is, you might bring a fresh take on something. We've all had different reading experiences depending on what subgenres we prefer to read or how long we've been reading romance. So I'm excited to have all 3 of you here and talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about romance as a whole in general. So both how long you've been reading romance or writing romance for Jenny and Lila, and in terms of what you read and what you write, how do babies usually factor into those stories? Anybody?
I mean, I can go. As far as like reading romance, it was something I started very early on. I think I was reading my first romance novel at like 10. It was Danielle Steele, of course. And I got them from my aunt, and I should not have been reading them at that current moment because some of the stuff I read was very like, whoa, a little too much for me. But as through the years, it's always been part of my reading experience. It wasn't until I got very entrenched in the indie romance space in 2019 when I was starting to like kick around picking it up again because I was writing it in college and trying to get published through kind of the Silhouette and the Harlequin lines and such. And then I put it away. And then when I was getting back into it and indie publishing was what I wanted to do, I started just consuming a bunch of indie romance novels, mostly through Kindle Unlimited. And as far as like writing and how like babies interject into what I write is that I am not going to ever be a mother. So for me, it was fun to write those in as kind of like a way to get a taste without like having to live with a human for 18 or more years, like that I created. And so it was fun for me to just kind of like put them in where, you know, a bunch of different places. And it's just whatever felt right with the characters. And so like in my first series, everybody had babies. I had like an epilogue that was full of babies. Like the third one was like everybody had a baby. But it was important for me to have different family structures where it was one couple just was a one and done. They just said one is enough for us. It's perfect. And then but I always knew I wanted to write a child-free romance where it was a child-free by choice heroine, and then that was the main conflict of the novel because I love romances where both people are like, you're child-free by choice, I'm child-free by choice, let's go, you know, like, but I really wanted it to be the main conflict because that happened in my own marriage when we were having discussions on children and how that was going to fit in. That is part of my personal love story. So I wanted to wait until I was like had a few books under my belt so I could give it justice. And so my most recent release, Gold Rush, is that it's a child free by choice heroine, and the hero decides that he's also child free by choice in the course of the book. So I'm all for a baby in an epilogue. I've done it a couple times, but it just is for me, it's what is right for the characters in the story. But it's not going to be like Gold Rush is not going to be my last baby-free HEA.
Well, and we will get to the surprise epilogue baby. I feel like that has its own discussion we will get to for sure. But Lila, how about you?
So I started with like Sweet Valley High when I was quite young. I was very interested in reading about like Todd and Devon and what they were getting up to with the twins. And then I sort of progressed into, I moved to Australia when I was sort of about 9-10 years old. And over there, I discovered this like series, which I think is very Mills and Boon, but for like kids. So like lots of different writers all under the same kind of umbrella, called Sweet Dreams. And I absolutely devoured those. Like they were all like 120 pages each, and I would buy like 5 with my pocket money, and then that just wouldn't be enough to get me through the month. And then from there it went on to love stories, and then it was like as I got older, it was like contemporary romance, like oh my god, every name has dropped out of my head.
It happened.
Hang on. I need to look at my shelf. So like Sarah Manning, and I started to get into kind of suspense romance. Like Julie Garwood's one of my favorites. She's got an awesome romantic suspense series. But while I was growing up, I wasn't ever really around children. Like me and my brother were very similar ages, so it's not like I had a really young sibling or anything. And I just never was bothered about children. And then as I've got older, I've got grumpier. So I'm like,
Same.
I just don't want
the
children.
Same.
And then in terms of like writing, I sort of went to film. I went and studied film at university and did a lot of script writing, and it was very just like genre fiction, not specifically romance. And then as over the last sort of 5 years, I've been making a lot of notes on things and writing stuff down. And then about 2, 3 years ago, just before COVID, I found a notebook where I'd written in it a story idea, and then next to the story idea, I'd written a note to myself saying, "Congratulations, you finally wrote down what's been in your head for 10 years." And I was like, "Oh my God," like everything just kind of clicked into place, and it went from there. And then, yeah, my first proper series was born, and the first book is baby-free, but not in terms of they've had a conversation. It just didn't get to that point. My second book was really interesting because my heroine is, I would say, is the complete opposite of me. She was like desperate to have a family and to have children, and that's kind of the story that I wrote for her. And I put bits in it very much in terms of she wanted to be taken care of by a man, and but was struggling to kind of reconcile that in our modern kind of independent women ways. And she did get a little bit baby fevery with that. And then I won't talk about my next one because that's slightly different. But yeah, I will next year be bringing out 2 more books that will be baby free, one by choice and one very similar to the first book. So I'm really looking forward to getting those done.
Fantastic. I love it. And Gabby, how about you?
Oh my gosh. So I was one of those like gifted and talented kids who read voraciously at like 5th grade, and I couldn't stand the books that were kind of for my age group. I just didn't relate to them. So I kind of picked up this habit of going to the bookstore and picking out the biggest book I could find in the teen section. And that was my qualifier for, I was like, if it's big, there's just a lot of story there because I just wanted a lot. And so I didn't really realize I was reading a lot of romance. I just picked books with a female character, and it just happen to often be romance, especially in like the teen section, because that is what a lot of teenagers are obsessed with, is just finding someone who likes you. And so that led me into some really wild, like I mentioned in the intro, like a book where the girl falls in love with a ghost, and it was just happened to be situations like where just like they were teenagers, so kids just weren't a thing, or you're in love with a ghost and kids will never be a thing. I don't think he ever found a corporeal form.
Never say never.
True.
You never know.
I now I'm gonna kind of find like a ghost, like I kind of want to find one of those. And then my own personal taste, I really am into cryptozoology and like vampires and werewolves. So of course, the biggest book I found as a teenager was Twilight, and that it was good stuff. Like 15-year-old me loved it, and so that kind of got me into like the other creature sphere. And it was interesting. I think Twilight was actually the first time I read a romance, kind of themed book where a baby came into it. Because when she got pregnant with a baby at like 18, 19, and like the last one, I was just like, ugh. That's when I was just like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like that, they've only been dating for like maybe 2 years and now they're together forever and there's a baby. It's like I could handle like the vampirism and turning into a vampire. That kind of commitment was fine. But a baby. And so then I was kind of like, oh, is this a thing? And I kind of stayed in the supernatural sphere of books, the Laurel K. Hamilton ones, which are just like super raunch and some weird things after a while. And I thankfully cut off after like the 8th book before there was ever a baby. That's like the longest series I've read, like 8 books in. Before, like, thankfully, like no child. I'm like, I think I want to get too deep. My issue is like so many times like babies don't fit in the worlds I read. I'm just like, why would you ever put a baby into the world I'm reading? And so yeah, I've just really enjoyed just finding chaotic romance situations. I like a little chaos. I like an enemies to lovers. I just like where like it's just about tension. And as I've gotten more into fat activism, I've been really hunting down plus size main characters, and those are really hard to find in mainstream. I can only think of 2 books that I've seen in like Target being like that to me mainstream, of like easily grabbable off the shelf, that have like a plus size main character. So lately with romance, I'm just trying to find a perspective of a person that like doesn't seem like me or has like a different life experience, so that I don't feel like I'm reading myself in the main character, and that's giving me whole new worlds, and so far no babies. No,
Yeah.
maybe I think there's one that had like the partner they chose had kids, and the person was conflicted because they didn't necessarily see babies in their life or children in their life, but thankfully like no, like, oh, and then they went on to have their own. Oh, I hate that trope of like there's his kids and then their own.
Yeah, not a fan. Not a fan.
Yeah. So it's just I've kind of happened into not babies just because I kind of read really chaotic situations where, oh, I think the only other mainstream is maybe like this is Outlander. Yeah, I think that series is considered romance. I think I was bummed by like the second book when they're like, let's bring a baby into the situation. I'm just like, again, why? You're on the run. It's the 1700s. Why baby?
Yeah. You bring up a couple interesting things though, in that I think it depends also what style of romance you're reading. Like I've found personally, I don't read as much paranormal, but to me that makes sense that maybe you're seeing less kids and babies and pregnancy
there's
in
some scary
that genre.
werewolf. Yeah, there's some scary werewolf things that keep getting advertised to me on Facebook that like they're all about babies. I'm just like, no, like we're gone.
Yeah. And then I read some, darker, spicier things. And I think also I tend to see less baby-centric stories within that space as I do in like the sweeter small town, environments where maybe we've kind of like culturally been raised to believe this is the area where you're meant to have children. Yeah. And so I think that kind of transcends from what we talk about in real life into our books and vice versa. But the other thing I wanted to ask both Jenny and Lila is, as indie authors, do you see a difference between the amount of baby-centric stories both in indie or in trad pub?
Oh yeah. Like in indie publishing, and I could be totally wrong, I feel like single dad is just everywhere. It's one of my favorites, but I just feel like single parent in general is a little more done in the indie space, where you have trad publishing has a lot of interesting fields where you have like STEM research, or you have people who, A Brush with Love. I read that recently, and that had no discussion of children throughout the book. I believe if it was, as a very small conversation. So it just, you have a little bit of that, as far as in the very, very epilogues of some of those books, the trad, but in the indie publishing space, there are some authors who just every other book is single dad because it's very popular for them, and it's why people go to them. And some of my favorite authors, you can just expect a baby for each couple, like sometimes within like 10% of the book, and then sometimes it's like you just know that they're going to have a baby. There's just no getting around it.
Yeah, I think definitely the single parent trope, but also the surprise pregnancy kind of one is another one that like is huge. And I do read some of them, but I generally kind of stay away from them because I feel like that's not something I'm not, this is going to sound awful. I'm not interested in having children, so I don't want to read about, like, I don't necessarily want to pick up a book specifically about this. But I think
that's totally fair.
Personal preference.
Yeah. And I think when I kind of look at when I was looking at my shelves the other night, like thinking about this, I've got a lot of quite older contemporary romance by some authors like Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and some of the really traditional kind of contemporary romance. And I was looking at it and I couldn't pick out one that didn't have either a baby in it, a baby at the end, or children. And I feel like it's definitely something that's changed as the generations have come on, in that, it's okay for women not to want to have children now, and not just women either, men too. And I feel like the more books that we're getting in kind of our generation, we're seeing more and more that there are child-free HEAs, whether by choice or because that's how the books naturally ended. But when I look back at traditional mainly back in the day, I feel like it's very heavy baby baby centric, baby fever.
Yeah, I will say the only exception, I did put out a call both on TikTok and Instagram asking for baby-free HEA recommendations from readers. And I feel like the one that I did consistently get from a lot of readers was a Jennifer Cruzy book called Bet Me. And Jennifer Cruzy's books are also something that I think I read early into my romance reading career. And they were what I would consider like ahead of their time in terms of like having conversations about, there's one book where one of the heroines is having trouble finding her orgasm. There's one book where they're very purposely choosing not to want to have children. And so it's stuff like that I feel like you're right, Lila, we don't see a lot of in older romance, but we are starting to see more in the conversation today. And I think it is because we're having the conversation today and that there are, until quite recently, a lot more options available to, couples, thruples, singles, whoever it is that is choosing or not choosing to have children. So I like to see that as the world changes. That sounds like the soap opera, as the world turns. The romance novels and what we're putting into them is also changing as well. So I would agree with you too, Jenny, though, that I think there tends to be more of a formula when it comes to trad pub that, because this is, let's be honest, it's a business. This is what's making money. Whatever is making a certain publisher money, whatever trope it might be, they're going to lean into that. And we see it change all the time. I feel like last year it was all about witches and Hades and Persephone retellings. So
spot one of those.
Right. It's something different every year. And sometimes single dads, I'm glad we brought up single parents, because I feel like, and add to the list if I'm missing any, but I feel like the ways that we see babies and children represented in romance the most are single parent romance, where generally we have a child there from the get-go. We have surprise pregnancy, which can sometimes rear its head in the epilogue. Again, we will get to that. Or something that comes about from maybe like a one-night stand or early stages of relationship. And then the third one I think of is secret baby, which is probably my least favorite of those three, just because I am not opposed to characters having children. I'm not opposed to people in real life having children. Let me get that straight. I know we're here to talk about baby-free HEAs. However, none of us are anti-baby. But what I am anti is people getting together and staying together for the sake of a child.
That one.
To me, and I know that that's something that people do tend to do in real life. However, in my books, in my romance books, I want it to always be first and foremost about the romantic relationship. And so something like that, I feel like detracts from the actual romantic connection between the characters.
I completely agree. I feel like so many times when like if neither of them have kids before, I get to it because I want to read about people connecting. I want to read about people from different backgrounds and how they process their traumas and their pasts and how that helps them go forth in relationships. And I feel like there is a problem with a lot of romance novels where there's a lot of people like, I don't know how to express my feelings. I don't know how to process feelings. And so these people who like get into fights and arguments, which can be entertaining because like they don't know how to express themselves. You throw a child into that, and I'm like, you can't even tell someone like what your needs are, or you feel like your wants are troublesome, and now you're gonna throw another human into this relationship that's already chaotic. It's like, slow down. Let's try to like figure out communication skills before you throw in like another person that can't communicate, and then you have to work together. And like that's not how I like to see people come together. I don't want to see you put aside your differences for the sake of this like accidental life. I want to see like partnerships build first, and like
Mhm.
lots of spicy things before I see like another human. Like it's just a different mindset, you know. And like I know, like I think for people who have kids, they want books that show like the spice can coexist with a child. But I think that that's a very separate genre of like established couples, and this is like their life journey, not two people who met because they bumped into each other on a New York street and now all of a sudden like they're trying to raise a child in like a studio apartment. Like that's not the life. And then he gets a surprise promotion that earns him like $200,000 a year. Like that's not
That's that
not what I
80s
want.
movie with Molly Ringwald where they
That's a
like
lot of 80s
have
movies.
the baby and like move into an apartment.
Which movie is that?
I'm trying to remember. It's her. They're in high school. She gets pregnant. The parents are not happy.
I'm trying to.
God, it's not Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink.
Oh, no.
It's not one of those. Oh, it is driving me nuts though that I can't think of it. And then they
You want me
fight.
to look it up?
I mean, I wouldn't be upset if you looked it up.
Okay, I'll look it up. Keep
One of those I
talking.
think of is like Look Who's Talking, which I think is like late 80s, early 90s, and she's like having an affair with like this her client of hers, and he's a piece of crap, and then she falls in love with John Travolta, but like she's pregnant at the time. Like that was better for me. Like I know it's a movie, but like that's a better story because she's already in that situation, and it's like a guy who's like, hey, you're in this crazy situation, I'm gonna support you. Plus, like Kirstie Alley and John Travolta is just delicious. But you know, that was a chaotic movie. Like it's just chaotic and wild. It's not like but I wouldn't want to read that in a book because I'd just be like, this is terrible choices by everybody.
I like Heather said, I love to read childless romance. I have children and want to live a different life through my books, which is almost kind of the opposite of what Jenny said, in that Jenny and her husband have chosen to be childless. And so she likes to maybe incorporate children and explore, characters having babies in her books because it's a different life. So I do like that. And I'll be the first to say there are times that I like to read children in romance. I would say, though, that unlike some tropes, I never purposefully seek out specifically a book knowing that there's going to be a secret baby or a surprise pregnancy. Like Jenny, on the other hand, let's hear it.
Oh, I do. Oh my God.
What is it? What brings you in?
Secret baby is my... I don't know what it is. I think I was destroyed, and this is very timely, but there was a TV movie called A Will of Their Own with Leah. God, what was her last name? She was in Back to the Future. Leah, what's her last name?
I know exactly who you're talking about. Well, now I'm going to look it up.
Okay, so I have no idea if you can find this anywhere, but there was a secret baby in there where he knew about it. Yeah, and then like they broke up and they were apart, and he just assumed like she took care of it. But she didn't. And then it came back together, and there was like angst, and I was just like, this TV movie has changed me. I own a copy. So lots of like discussions about reproductive rights throughout. It's like it's tackling a lot. Highly recommend if you can find it. So I love when there is a movie on Netflix and it's like he comes back to small town, and then like they were like together, but then they like broke up, and then there's a baby that just like shows up, and he has that moment where he's like, that's my child.
That's my 16-year-old son.
That's my jam. That's my jam. And so I do have one planned that's coming up, and it's just like, but you have to have a good reason. You have to have a good reason for why one parent kept it from the other parent. Yeah. And so you have to like have a lot of good motivations, a lot of like good conflict and everything like that. And I just love how sometimes it forces the hero to step up in his life. I just I love it. I love it.
I know I've already mentioned Susan Elizabeth Phillips, but I'm going to go there again because I will die for that woman. So she's got 2 books. There's one called Nobody's Baby But Mine, which comes up on, if you do like a top 100 romance books or something, it's always in the top 10. It's so good. It's basically, it's so good, right? But she does trick him into getting pregnant. It's essentially what happened. Yeah, all of your faces then completely changed. Right. But this book, honestly, it's so good. It's so good. Anyway, and then he finds out what she did, and then he obviously forces her to marry him because this is the era that we're talking about. But it's so good. And then there's another one called Fancy Pants, which is just, it's a fantastic book, but it's not until about halfway through that the heroine is pregnant, and she does exactly what we were just saying. She doesn't tell him, and she keeps it from him. And then there's like a moment when they meet each other after like 10 years, and then he sees this child and he knows, and she denies it for ages that it's his child and all that. But yeah, that's also so good. So there are 2 instances of books I love where children are involved. Having said, I'm not a fan of those.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, since we're making recommendations for books and TV movies that feature babies that we do enjoy, I will say, I think for me, what I will enjoy is especially when it's a different framework for the story. Like for me, I have a hard time with ones where it's like they've known the person and they had their baby and it's 16 years later and they still haven't told, like, that to me really bothers me. However, one night stands, I think, are the way around that a lot of the time, at least for me, in that if this is a hot, sexy stranger you met on vacation, I don't expect you to have all their information and be able to contact them about their surprise baby. So, I mean, that's fine. For me, at least. There is one book that I really enjoy that takes a little bit of a different take on it. And that's Smooth Talking Stranger by Lisa Kleypas. And I feel like, first of all, people forget that she writes contemporary books too, because we focus so often. Yeah, no, she focuses mostly on historical, but this is a book from a series she has called The Travis Family. And in this particular book, it's really the sister of the mother of a baby who has been given basically custody of the baby, and she's trying to find who the father is and failing along the way and basically thinking it's one guy and it's not. But then he helps her, and then they kind of fall in love and form this family of their own. And so I liked that because it was kind of like a different take. And I didn't have to experience the entire pregnancy, because I think that's the other thing is I don't really love reading books where characters are pregnant. And it's not to say that I don't think people who are pregnant deserves their happy ending, because they do. But I think what bothers me is too often I feel like pregnancy becomes they lose like the sexual aspect of it as well. That for some reason pregnancy can't also be beautiful or sexy. Like they just become like more untouchable. And I don't like that. I want them to still be sexual creatures and sexual beings who enjoy each other's bodies and they love that their partner's pregnant. And I feel like I don't see that enough. And so maybe if I did, I would enjoy it more.
Yeah, I think the few times I've had it, like I've mentioned, like the partnerships just weren't good partnerships. Like they were either too young or just like maybe they're just badly written couples. Like I just haven't, and I definitely feel like I do need to go more indie. I just haven't had romances where I feel like the partnership was like real. It was just like a fancy base where like there's no money problems, there's no real work problems. It's like, oh, what dream career do I want to pursue next? And so it just felt like babies were inserted for like conflict. It's like they already have conflict. They're not settled. They're not a solid rock team. And so many times it like I feel like the baby's like one person's want and not someone else's, and they didn't like talk about it beforehand. Like I've never read a romance where people were like, hey, this is my wants and desires in my future life. It's more just like, we'll figure it out as we go and we'll have a fight about it because we can't just talk like adults. And I and like as I grow up, I think I get worried that like a lot of these books have actually influenced like real life couples, because I see real life couples doing this stuff where like
Twilight
been
did.
together long. Yeah, and like
Twilight 100% did.
Now there's a baby and these two people are attached for life, or at least 18 for life of the child, to each other. And I'm just like, romance is not a blueprint for how to operate like an actual human life. Like that's not it's escapism, and like you can read about crazy things you hope never happen, and other people are like, no, I think it's good, it worked out in that book. And I'm like, no.
It was also a ghost.
Yeah. He disappeared at the full moon. I don't know why. He wouldn't tell me. He's just very angry all the time. It's like
yeah, I think if we got farther into discussing like werewolves and paranormal, we would also come across like the breeding kink, which is a whole different thing that honestly I don't know enough about to even like
it's toxic masculinity as a trope, as like a good thing. It's like, I want the most toxic man you've ever thought of, and that makes him hot. And I'm just like, run away, run far away.
My cubs inside of you.
What is this?
Oh gosh. Well, we've alluded to it a little bit, but I think it's important that we do discuss specifically the epilogue baby, because this is something that I feel like in over a decade of reading romance didn't really cross my mind until a few years ago. And it's probably because I'm now in my 30s. And I think before that, it wasn't even really until my friends and family like started having babies that I even considered like, oh, that's right, a possibility. Like people do this. Like I know people who are doing this. So, but then I feel like I started noticing it in every romance I read with an epilogue baby. So first of all, let's talk about the why. Why is it there? And also, how do we feel about it?
I think maybe it's because, is it because, this is kind of my opinion, is that people see like the getting married and having children still very much feels like a life goal ticked. And I feel like when you want to see in romance, you want to see it work out, you want to see people succeed, I feel like that's what it is. It's like the cherry on the cake of success. Here we go. Whereas that's not what success looks like anymore in your personal life. And that's why we're starting to see the change. But yeah, I feel like the epilogue marriage, the epilogue baby, it's very much a, here's everything nicely wrapped up in a little bow for you to go and enjoy. And yeah, I definitely feel like that shouldn't be a thing anymore.
Yeah, I think it's too short to just be like, and baby, like, because I do read a little more one-off, so I don't have like a long time with these characters. I see like their early months, and I really like that first falling in love, the will they won't, like that's really great. And then they're like, oh, like you said, Lila, like they made it, so here's like they made a baby, and I'm just like, well, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that they're going to stay together. That doesn't mean that their relationship's healthy. That doesn't mean that they should be like some of these characters. Like, no, don't. These people should not be in charge. They shouldn't be in charge of their own lives. Do not put them in charge of another person's life. And it just felt like it was forcing that thing of like, this is what a successful relationship does. You have to have a baby, or else your partnership is like unfinished and undone. And I think there still are a lot of people who like unfortunately feel that way. Like if there isn't a child, they haven't made it. They have like failed in some way. And I think that like a child should be like a completely different goal and not about your like I don't think a child should be your relationship's goal. It's not like you hit this tier and then you get to have like a child in it, because like I know lots of people who have wanted children, and I think that's what frustrates me. Like there are so many people who I know would be great parents, and life hasn't worked out that way for them to be a child. So these like accidental babies at the end, like the pregnancy test of like the very last chapter, or the epilogue baby, it just feels so not real to life about how many struggles there can be to have children, how long it can take, the different routes people take. I really feel like it was like an IVF baby at the epilogue end, because like that could be a really different, interesting end versus just like bam, easy piece of cake. You don't even hear about the pregnancy. It was a breeze. No morning sickness, no nothing. Career not interrupted. And so it takes away anything, I feel like the rest of the book is worked on, if it worked on anything and it wasn't just raunch. Like, it just takes away the humanity of the characters to just be like, this is like, boop, like Stork dropped it off, there you go. And like, so it's just kind of like, I want it to be a culmination of something, like if it was mentioned or worked on or something, but just to be like, and they lived happily with 3 children. It's just like, why? Why can't we just have them have like found their dream careers or work together, or like something a little more, I don't know, concrete to who they are as people?
Yeah. I think this is an interesting comment too, from Katinka here, that, you know, who reads mostly historical romance, that 95% of epilogues I see are the same, including the baby. I totally love what you said too, Gabrielle, about having it feel so easy too, like, because I feel like, again, this is one of the reasons I really enjoyed Smooth Talking Stranger, was that it kind of looked at a different side of it. And I don't love that. Usually, not in every romance, but usually when a character does become pregnant, during the story, the automatic assumption is that they're having the baby, that there isn't really much of a conversation about what are the options that we have. Like, and then in the epilogue, I think it's just assumed that because this is a couple who's fallen in love and they've gotten married or they're engaged, that the next step, baby. And something I did want to share, and this is from Cherish Reed, who we've reviewed on the podcast a few times. And Cherish, I actually asked to be part of the panel today. She unfortunately wasn't able to join us, but this is the reason I wanted to talk to her. Is she released a book earlier this year called I'll Come Back for You. Great book, by the way. It's Black romance, haunted house. There are ghosts, but nobody's fucking them. So just know that going in. But I know next time. But one of the things I love is when she was promoting the book, she tweeted this message and said, the HEA for I'll Come Back for You doesn't end in marriage or babies, and that does not make the book an HFN, or happily for now. The goals for this couple: fall in love, confront trauma, eliminate the ghost, advance their respective careers. That should be HEA enough.
Absolutely.
And I loved that, because I think people somehow tie this idea of like the happily ever after includes marriage and baby. And if we don't have either of those things, it's an HFN. It's not complete. And that's something that I'd love to see us distance ourselves from in romance in general.
Absolutely. And just going back to the whole like baby in an epilogue, I'm sorry to circle back a little bit, but I've done the baby in the epilogue 2 times. And so the first time I wrote that, it was the 3rd book in my first series. There was 2 main leads that found out they were pregnant at the same time. It was their 2nd baby, so there was always already a kid, but there was a main theme of infertility. So it kind of was their happily ever after, because they both desperately wanted to be mothers, and it was very important for them to have like 2 children and like have multiple children. And so it was set up the whole time. And I think if it's really set up that these people want to have children, maybe there was a conversation earlier in the book that is something that they want, and
totally
they discuss it.
Yes.
I think that's good. That there needs to be a little bit foreshadowing that you're going to have an epilogue baby, I think. And then the second time I did it, we had a couple that were in their mid-30s. It was something that they wanted. They weren't, there was like things, there was a reason why a marriage wasn't part of the epilogue, but like the pregnancy for them, because their relationship was kind of accelerated because they were in the mid-30s, they had figured out a lot of things, had past relationships that influenced this relationship. It made sense because just of who the heroine was, that a surprise pregnancy would work for them, because the hero was just so down for her and was willing to settle down for her. And like it just made sense at that point for the timing. But I've also done and written stories where the fact that they're together and they're in love is good enough. So I have a novella coming out next month where there is no mention they're living together, no mention of a engagement or proposal or anything like that, no babies, and the fact that they're in the same town and they're in love is good enough. I think with novellas that makes a lot more sense to have just kind of like they're in love, that's good enough. And that's what I have coming out. So it's just kind of like it's a case by case basis. But in my head, that couple that has the novella where it's like they're in love and it's good enough, they're going to get married and they're going to have kids. You can just kind of see it coming in that novella, but it's not in the epilogue.
Yeah.
Because for them, the fact that they're in the same town is the happily ever after, that they found what makes them content and happy, and that those things will come when that couple is ready. And I think that's just important to have the foreshadowing, but then, you know, the fact that they're in love, I think is good enough, and they're together is good enough. You know,
I agree.
So.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. And again, with the whole epilogue baby thing, it's like, and I don't know if you know, you guys get it as well, but I get a lot of questions of like or statements made, and it feels like they're saying, oh well, if you're not having a baby, like, are you okay? Like, are you gonna be okay? And I'm like, I'm gonna have the best time ever. Like, I'm gonna have money, I'm gonna have time, I'm gonna have sleep, and all this stuff. And I feel like, yeah, with the epilogue baby, like, it feels like it wasn't enough that they were happy and content to just have each other.
Yeah.
And that should be a norm. That should be a norm.
It definitely should be. One of my favorite people on Twitter who she shares her posts on Instagram as well. Her name is Sarah. And I think her handle is like OMG Skur. But she's been a guest on Boobies and Newbies, and I asked her because I find her tweets so hilarious and relatable. But she actually just wrote an article the other day that was all about if you're a woman specifically of a certain age who doesn't have children and maybe you're not in a relationship, our opportunities to have celebrations are very limited. Like, we don't celebrate our kids' birthdays. We're not having engagement parties. We're not, you know, and so when do we get to celebrate us for all the accomplishments that we do have that don't include or depend on having a partner or a child? And so I thought that was great. I definitely recommend people check it out. But that's something that I'd love to see too. Like, we're not sad people live. I mean, I live alone and I love it. I work from home. I get to go wherever I want. And I know people who have children who are very happy as well. It's not mutually exclusive. We can both be happy and coexist together and be excited for each other, as can our characters in our books. And I will step down off the soapbox. But I did see a couple comments that I just wanted to bring up. Let me see if I can
I want to respond to.
I think
bring
it's
up
the same one.
what was probably the question that everybody saw, which was, do we think that because romance is seen as escapism, fantasy for a lot of people? I will say I tend to read a little more of what I consider like more realistic, attainable, heightened reality romance. Is having a baby with no issues also escapism fantasy, as opposed to thinking about the struggles with, you know, maybe IVF or just the pregnancy process, sleepless nights. So anybody want to weigh in?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to talk to. I think, you know, when we talk about wanting to see other things, I think that's like, as in addition to, we're not trying to like eliminate other kinds, because everyone needs an escapist fantasy, but what often gets overlooked is representation. It's like, as I mentioned before, like as a fat person, and I use that term neutrally, as a fat person, there aren't a lot of like plus size, like fat characters who get to fall in love happily in books. And, you know, some of them might think, oh, escapism, I want like a thin body. I like no one who has body image issues, no one who's uncomfortable in their body. And one of the like earliest times where I saw representation was actually in Dumpling, which I think it was into like a Netflix thing. And they talk about having like someone's hand touch your role and be like concerned about the feeling of like your lover or your boyfriend like touching your body in a body part they may not have touched on someone else before, and just feeling uncomfortable. And so many times representation is overlooked in exchange for fantasy, for flawless, for lack of confirmation. And I think that there's a great time to have this. I mean, that's why I like my supernatural things. Those aren't real life situations. It's, you know, total fluff. It's, you know, and so many of these, like I mentioned, have like dream jobs, money's never a concern. So there's a great time to have escapist fantasies. And then there's times where you just want to see someone like yourself, someone have your issues and conquer them, or handle them in a way that you didn't think to handle them yourself, and get inspired to change your life, or just to feel more confident and know that there's other people out there, have a sense of community. But like representation as well as escapism is so important. I think that representation has like lagged behind in favor of escapism. So I'd love to see them coexist so you can have your options and not have like one favorite over the other.
Absolutely.
100. I mean, I'm not even going to add to that, because I feel like
I can't really drop my mic, but
no, that like covered it completely. And I think you're right. I think it's not, I don't think anybody is saying we need less babies in romance. That's certainly not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for as many romance novels as I read, as all of us read or write, that include you know, single parents and or babies in the epilogue and or, you know, a surprise pregnancy. I want to see just as many, or at least a small amount, that include people who become pregnant that maybe choose not to carry out a pregnancy, who books that also include characters who have very clear discussions about what they want and whether or not that includes children or not. And because again, it's so representative, like Gabrielle was saying, of a large majority of people who exist in America. I'm sorry to exclude you, Lila. I should say outside in the world, that have these conversations on a daily basis. Oh, I'm so sorry. Somebody's asking, what is HEA? I should be very specific. Happily ever after. We just use this acronym in romance a lot. But if you are outside of the romance sphere, of course, that wouldn't necessarily be on your radar. So I hope that clears it up. HEA, happily ever after. HFN, happily for now. But yeah, I just want to see more options, more variety, more representation. I'm glad that I do have some recommendations to share as well. And I know I'll be making a list to share across social media too, that is a little bit more comprehensive and includes, you know, some variety of like some characters choosing to have a vasectomy, some characters discussing how they've had an abortion in the past. So yeah, there's so many different ways to treat pregnancy in general that we should be seeing all of those different ways represented in our stories, both for books, movies, TV, all of it.
Well, my the book that I'm going to be releasing in the next couple of months, actually this is going to be a bit of a spoiler for everyone, sorry, but I feel like it's maybe in theme with what we're talking about. She got pregnant when she was 17/18 and she had an abortion. And then unfortunately what happened was she had complications after that abortion, and she had to have like a full hysterectomy, have everything taken out so she can no longer have children. And it is something that you know, she felt she made the right choice at the time, but then what's happened since is she feels let down by her decisions and her body and everything, because she does want those things. And again, that was really tough to write, and some parts of it were really sad, and the research as well to kind of understand that, especially with the prevalence of some of the things that are happening in the world at the moment. It just felt very kind of poignant when I was thinking about it and writing it, and I was getting quite sad over it, because it's just such a thing that you don't see a lot in books about. Like, I don't think I've honestly read one book where they've had fertility issues or done IVF, and yet my friends have gone through that.
Sure.
My very close friends.
Same, yeah.
And yeah, there's no, again, abortion's another one where, I'm aware there's a couple of books. I've only read a couple. There's, again, I don't feel like too much out there. And, this is again, a representation matter, even in terms of life decisions that you make that are big decisions that people have a lot of opinions about.
Yeah, I mean, in Gold Rush, my child free by choice romance, she had a tubal ligation, and there was the discussion of the medical gaslighting that happens to women, where doctors don't believe us when we say we do not want to have children, that our choice is to terminate a pregnancy or to decide to make it a permanent situation. And there's a brief mention in it, and I did put in my trigger warnings because that's something that child-free women have to definitely confront when they're looking for permanent sterilization, where, my husband has had a vasectomy and it was a much less dramatic process.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little bit of education, and then like he got on the table and the guy's like, "You don't have kids?" Like in the middle of doing the process. Versus when it's a woman going into the office, it's like, "You don't have kids, you're young, you like may regret it." And it's like, why are you questioning who I am and what I want out of life? If it's permanent, there's a bunch of kids in the foster care system that could use a good home. It's that birthing your own, legacy isn't the only option.
Right.
And so, I didn't put it in Gold Rush, but I was like, Whitney, who's the main character, she probably had an abortion, when she was younger, and it's not canon. But in my head, I'm like, that's definitely a possibility that could have happened. And I just wish there was just more discussions about, rather than they're in the heat of the moment and it's just like they don't discuss birth control, and it's like, what is going on?
Which
Like
at this point in reading romance, if there is not a discussion about birth control at all, my mind immediately is like, oh, pregnant.
it's coming. It's
Baby.
coming.
Oh my
Here it
gosh,
comes.
I'm reading a book where that just happened, where it's very I'm reading, Disney's put out a series where they're redoing like the fairy tales as like romance novels with like different characters. Like the first one was If the Shoe Fits, and it was like a plus size Cinderella, and she's on like a dating show, and like a bachelor with a plus size like bachelorette. And the current one I'm reading is like a Beauty and the Beast one, and they tumbled into bed, like no talks of anything, and I'm just like, are we gonna have a baby, or are we just gonna live in this La La Land where like they use the rhythm map? Like I do want a little more reality to my things of like, I like open a drawer, mention taking your pills like a couple chapters ago, something that's just like responsibility.
Yeah, put a condom on. There, it's one sentence. I mean, it's not
really
the most
great.
difficult. Well, and I think birth control is something that, because it's more, that's something that I feel like when I first started the podcast, when I would bring on guests who hadn't read romance before, they were always surprised by the mention of birth control in romance novels. And I would tell them, yeah, it's become a lot more prevalent to have that talked about or mentioned on the page in the last few years. And now I feel weird if I don't read it. So I kind of hope that maybe that's the discussion that we're moving towards, like that maybe there'll be more discussions about the options and whether or not a character chooses to have a baby or not, or chooses to have a tubal ligation, a vasectomy, in the future. I would love to see more of those, the same way that we've treated having discussions about birth control and prevention. So, I don't know. I mean, I think it's starting to happen as well. Oh, good. There's a lot of other people who are very upset about, or they expect the accidental pregnancies when birth control isn't mentioned. Daria's going to leave soon, but wants to look for Rex. Yeah, so how about we wrap things up? I know, Jenny, obviously you have your book that's out that we've mentioned. So I highly recommend people check out Gold Rush. I did want to share, I'm just going to share a couple that I've got. And these were mostly recommendations made to me, although I have read a few of them. And like I said, I'll be sharing a more comprehensive list on our social media for Boobies and Newbies. But just a couple worth mentioning. Jillian Graves has a new book out. It is called Titan, a Gargoyle Daddy Dom Romance. So just to show you that there are discussions about pregnancy and babies being had beyond the contemporary sphere. Jillian's book has a baby-free HEA, and it is explicitly stated in the text that the female character does not want children. So I think you'll find too that, at least in my experience, the majority of times where it is discussed, it's usually giving a little more agency to the heroine to say that she's choosing not to have children. However, again, I'd like to see it across all boards. Jillian's in my critique group. Yeah, great. Let's see. I also have a historical romance recommendation. I know somebody in the comments mentioned their historical romance reader, Liliana. Oh shoot, let me see. I think it's Liana de Rosa. I could be getting this wrong. But she has a recommendation to Tame a Scandalous Lady, has a heroine who's upfront about not wanting children. So that's another one. Anybody else want to weigh in on some book recommendations they might have?
I have other ones too.
Yeah.
I did ask for books where it's an explicit child-free couple, and so I have not read these personally, but I have been told by like several people that this is a true child-free. Can't Help Loving You by Eve Casey.
Yes.
She's lovely. Rumors and Romance by Julia Jarrett, and then Hoping for Hemingway by Kelsey Kingsley all have child-free main characters.
I was going to recommend Julia's book too.
Yeah.
So that's two for Julia's book.
I just read one called Let's Get Textual by Tegan Hunter, I think it is.
That one.
And that's not, it's not, they don't decide not to have children, but it is child free. And oh my God, it was so good. And then I've got Lucy Score Rock Bottom Girl, which I've started, and so far I'm loving it.
So good.
My first book, It's Only Love, has child-free HEA. Again, not explicitly, but there isn't a mention of children. And I have read, obviously, Jenny's book, Gold Rush. It was very good. I really enjoyed it. And you know what? There were some things that she put in there, and I think I even said it in my review, that really hit like inside in terms of the view of it and some of the guilt that comes along with it and stuff like that. Like, so I would recommend all of those.
I love it.
Thank you, friend.
I have to add that to my list. I have more an author because I kind of want to stick up to like the plus size characters. Julie Murphy writes really great plus size characters. She has an upcoming, it's like Christmas in July, but it's like about a ski resort that's supposed to be like extra raunchy. And it has a plus size main character. And I just really love how she's writing plus size romance characters. I do like her If the Shoe Fits in the meant to be Disney, like reimagined. Because it's like it's just really nice to see plus size main characters where it's not fetishized. It's not, and they aren't angry at their bodies. They're like content in their bodies, and they know how to advocate for themselves. And it's just so refreshing to see. And I just really want more of that in the world. So yeah, just anything by Julie Murphy just makes my heart go pitter patter.
I have an advanced copy of her holiday book. It's her and Sierra Simone writing together. And it's called A Merry Little Meet Cute. And I'm only a few pages in. I've heard great things about it already, but not only is there like great fat rep, but there's also there's sex workers. A lot of them work in the porn industry in the book. So I'm super excited about that. Michelle mentioned Headliners by Lucy Parker, has some explicit mentions of how both the main characters don't want children. That's great. And then the last one I wanted to mention, oh shoot, I lost my page. A few people did mention the recently released Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes by Kat Sebastian, which I think has a child or a baby from a previous marriage in it, but the characters explicitly discuss not having any more. So that's great. Yeah, I would love to just see more of this to complement the vast amount of romances we do have already that have single dad, surprise pregnancy, secret pregnancy, epilogue babies, because those are fine. We just need to add to it and have a nice variety of representation to match all of our wants and desires. So this has been lovely. We're at about an hour here, so I think we're going to go ahead and start to wrap up. But real quick, does everybody just want to tell anybody watching where they can find and follow you and read more from you and what's coming up next?
I'll go. Yeah, go. Sorry. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Musings of a Fox, and also on musingsofafox.com, which is my blog where I talk about just all things about living in a fat body, but also fashion and just being a happy person, but also struggling with, mental health stuff and chronic conditions that aren't related to my body, but are just, things that people live with, and how you can live with all those things and still just be, a worthy human, and that people are worthy of compassion and laws that are just, regardless of anything else, just by being a human being.
So yeah, I'm on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all at Lila Dawes Author, and I've got a new website which I'm really proud of because I did it myself. Obviously through a provider. I'm not that talented, but that is liladawesauthor.com. So yeah, come check me out on TikTok. I do stupid things on there, and then sometimes I put about my book.
So I'm Jenny Bunting Books on Instagram and TikTok. I do have a Facebook group that I'm trying to revive called Jenny Bunting's Adultish Readers. My books are available on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited and paperback. So the child-free by choice book I have is called Gold Rush. If you want a baby one, it's Fool's Gold is your best bet. And then my one coming up where there's no mention of anything but their love and they live together or live in the same town is Safe With You. And that's coming out August 5th.
Nice. Well, and I'm Kelly, and I host Boobies and Newbies. I guess I should have introduced myself at the beginning, but you can listen to Boobies and Newbies wherever you stream your platforms. We are here on YouTube for Tit Talk the second Saturday of every month. So look out for us next month in August. I can't believe it will be August next month.
Don't start with me.
A whole different conversation. And for the month of July, I am doing a special called Slick Summer Nights, where we are doing a showdown of our favorite steamy, sexy scenes on the podcast. They're quick, bite-sized episodes that are all about the smut. So if you need, something quick and dirty, check it out. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, which I will be releasing later in the month of July, thanks for listening. You can always check out the video, which will live on the Boobies and Newbies YouTube page if you want to see our gorgeous faces. Reach out to me. Hit me up with any suggestions for topics that you want to see discussed, any book recommendations you might have, and definitely check out Boobies and Newbies on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at Boobies Podcast. I will be sharing a list of more book recommendations featuring baby-free HEAs. And thanks everybody so much for tuning in. Thank you to my beautiful guests.
Thank you for having
us. It's been amazing.
Have a great day, everybody.
You too. Take care.